Hello, everyone, and welcome into Coach Craig's Sports. This is the XFL kind of DFS stream, kind of recap from week one, taking a look at first look for XFL DFS for week two as well. So I'm going to bring up over here on the XFL.com website. We're going to go through a couple or technically all the games from this past weekend, look at them, see kind of what happened overall, talk a little bit over on my spreadsheet about kind of target shares, running back carry share as well. Looking at different teams in terms of like the quarterbacks who played, whether or not they had all the pass attempts for their team or what percentage of the pass attempts they had for their team overall. So we can kind of get a better estimate for week two going forward as well. So we're going to start over here. The Renegades and the Vipers was the very first game, on Saturday. Arlington ended up winning 22-20. They mainly scored most of their points on defense. So I know a lot of people were super critical of Drew Plitt. We're going to start off with the Renegade side, I guess, too, as well. And I can probably go over in between each game and kind of go over to the spreadsheet and talk about that. If you guys would prefer a different order, it's kind of a new thing here where we're recapping these games overall and just kind of going through things. But the Renegades, they ran 56 total plays. They had 25 pass attempts, 31 rush attempts. So pretty balanced offense overall. You can include kind of those 5 rush attempts that Drew Plitt did have. At least 3 of them were scrambles. I believe 2 were quarterback sneaks. So let's just call it 29 rush attempts and, 28 pass plays. So they were a pretty balanced offense overall. That's kind of something that I did expect, with Jonathan Hayes and Chuck Long being the play caller. Although, Bob Stoops has kind of had a little bit more pass heavy tendencies. I know a lot of people were super critical of Drew Plitt, but he didn't play awful like a lot of people want to say that he did. He had one bad throw. That was obviously the interception. He had some nice throws, some nice anticipation passes and everything else like that. Davion Smith led the backfield with 15 carries, and Keith Ford was behind him. They were listed as co-starters, but Smith did most of the work. He was kind of that lead back where Keith Ford was the backup. Adrian Killens got 2 end arounds kind of in the slot and did some kick returning, but not much else in terms of running back. We'll see if that changes in the coming weeks or not, just because he recently did join the team. In terms of the wide receivers, we saw no Rennell Hall as he was dealing with an injury after he was listed as a starter. We saw Jordan Smallwood, Tyler Vaughns, and Brandon Arconato being kind of the main 3 wide receivers for them overall. From the wide receiver position, obviously Sal Canal was very involved in the passing game as a tight end as well. Then we saw a couple other tight ends mix in there, Nate Becker, Sean Byer. I think Alex Ellis got in there a little bit as well. And then we just saw just a little bit of like Lawan Winningham and Sean Modster as well at that wide receivers, kind of the 4th and 5th wide receivers. Not really too much else to say there. We'll get over to the stats in a minute, talking, percentage of team carries and target shares overall. Going over to the Vegas side real quick. Luis Perez was the quarterback. He threw the ball 36 times. They ran the ball 15 times, which may be a little bit of a surprise here. I guess technically 14 times if you don't count that punt where the punt was about to get blocked and then the punter just kind of ran for a couple of yards instead of getting the punt blocked. So when you're looking at that, they ran 50 plays overall and 72% pass rate, which was a little bit more than we probably expected from this Vegas team overall. So that will be something to keep an eye on as we move forward. And then maybe whether or not Luis Perez is the starter this week, we'll keep an eye on that throughout the week as well, since he did have 2 pretty costly interceptions. Both were returned for pick sixes. In terms of running backs, nobody really stood out here. John Lovett was kind of the leading rusher, but he had a fumble. Torrey was used a little bit as a receiving back. Rod Smith did look pretty terrible out of the backfield as well. So nothing we can really take away from there. In terms of wide receivers, they used quite a few. Jeff Badette, Geronimo Allison, Martavius Bryant were the main 3 that were on the field more times than not. Matthew Sexton and Sanique Sweeting did mix in as well. Sweeting even got 2 carries out of the backfield. They did have one where XFL.com lists this as Mr. Harrell having a 19-yard reception. But I know on DraftKings, they did give that to Geronimo Allison, where he had 4 catches for 41 yards and 8.1 DraftKings points. So we'll just kind of have to see that. I know it's kind of been mixed between varying sites as well. Brandon Dillon wasn't used very much as a tight end, just on the 2-point conversion, but he was their main tight end overall. So that's kind of what we got there. I'm probably going to get off this screen for a second here. We'll go over to my spreadsheet real quick, where I do have some of these stats from that game. I'll try to break down each game individually and then go from there. So let's see what We got. So the Renegades were the first team that came up. As I kind of already mentioned, Drew Plitt was the starter, Kyle Slaughter was the backup, and Kevin Anderson, the third string quarterback, was inactive week 1. In terms of pass attempts, Drew Plitt had all the pass attempts. Obviously, it was 19 out of 25, 172 yards with the 1 pick, 0 touchdowns, 7.48 DraftKings points, so nothing special there. You could definitely take a chance on him this week. He's going to be pretty cheap once again. Kyle Slaughter could mix in, especially if that offense doesn't really get going. As I mentioned with the running backs, Keith Ford was listed as a co-starter, but was used as a backup. And then Davion Smith listed as a co-starter, but was mainly used as the starter. And then Adrian Killens, who was recently traded to the teams, got just 2 carries, which he kind of lined up in the slot, and they were end arounds. Didn't really do too much in those carries. Out of the backfield, the only one that received targets was Davion Smith with 3 targets. He had 2 receptions for 15 yards. In terms of the carries, we had Keith Ford with 9 carries. Davion Smith had 15, and then Adrian Killens had 2. Obviously, Drew Plitt had 5. So in terms of the market share for this backfield, Davion Smith got 48% of them, about 29% for Keith Ford, and then, about 6.5 for Adrian Killens on his 2 carries. We'll see if Killens gets bumped up in future weeks since he just did recently join the team via trade. And then I don't expect Drew Plitt to be involved in the rushing game, but we'll just have to see how this team shakes out. But I would assume that Davion Smith remains the lead back at least for week 2. And then obviously, like we mentioned, he was the only one that did receive targets out of the backfield, 12% target share for him. In terms of this wide receiver group, and we'll group tight end in there as well, just because Sal Cannella, he had 8 targets overall, 32% target share. He had 7 catches for 70 yards. Obviously, no touchdowns since Split didn't throw any. Arconato had 20% target share, as well as Tyler Vaughn's. Both had, excuse me, I got this backwards here. So both had 5 targets, and Arconato had 3 catches for 32 yards. Tyler Vaughn's had 4 catches for 38 yards. And then everybody else just kind of mixed in with like 1 target. So we saw Modster, Jordan Smallwood, Winningham, Becker all have 1 target, so they chipped in for a 4% target share. So at least at this point in time, we're going to assume that Sal Cannella is the number 1 target. I would assume Tyler Vaughn's is number 2, and then Arconato as the number 3 target in this offense until we see otherwise. Jordan Smallwood was out there a lot, but he looked like a guy that really hadn't played too much since the last XFL. He had the 1 great catch, but other than that, was having a lot of trouble separating. The Renegades defense did perform pretty well due to those 2 pick sixes, but otherwise, not really saying too much about them at this point in time. Then we're going to move down to Vegas real quick, just since we have that game is the one that we're talking about. So Brett Hundley was the backup for this game. He did not get in at all. So we did see 100% of the target share or for pass attempts go to Luis Perez overall. Obviously, you had mixed results there, 22 for 36. It was really good in the first half, 249 yards total, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 21.96 DraftKings points. Definitely something that we could consider playing once again. But the big thing about him is he was kind of known as the safe guy, and then he threw the 2 interceptions, and I believe he only had 1 interception in the USFL last year. Jalen McClendon, the 3rd-string quarterback, was inactive. Brian Burt, kind of the 4th-string running back / wide receiver, was inactive as well. Rod Smith was listed as the starter. He had 5 carries. We saw 4 for John Levitt and 3 for Torrey. So when you break down the target or the market share in terms of carries, about 36% for Rod Smith, 28.5% for John Levitt, and 21% for Torrey. I would not be surprised if Torrey factors in a little bit more in the coming weeks. 14% on the 2 carries for Sanique Sweeting, who did get a couple carries out of the backfield. In terms of targets out of the backfield, John Lovett had nothing. Rod Smith had 2 targets, which gives him about 5.5% target share. And then Torrey had the 1. So he was, about 2, just under 3% target share overall. Geronimo Allison at the wide receiver group, 4 targets for him, so 11% target share. Jeff Badette and Martavius Bryant both came in at 25% target share with 9 targets apiece. Jeff Badette obviously was the most effective one out of those, as he had 6 catches for 81 yards and 2 touchdowns. Probably had another big play in there, but got called for an offensive pass interference where he lightly pushed off, but probably should have been a no call altogether. Matthew Sexton, 5 targets, so he was just under 14%. And then Sweeting also had 4 targets, around 11%. Brandon Dillon just had that 1 lone target besides the extra point conversion, so coming in just shy of 3% target share. So pretty much at this point in time, in terms of targets, we know it's probably going to be a lot of Jeff Badet. It's probably going to be a lot of Martavius Bryant in terms of targets, with the other three guys kind of mixing in from there as well. So we're going to get off of here. We're going to go back over to the next game up, which I'm just probably going to go in order. I don't know if it's going to be, we'll go in actual order. We'll go to the Houston game since that was the next Saturday game as well. Obviously, with Houston, we kind of saw what we expected in terms of pass rate, since they came in throwing about 72% of the time. For Orlando, they had to throw the ball a little bit more since they got down pretty big, at least early on. We'll start off with the Guardians. They threw the ball 39 times total. Paxton Lynch was the initial first quarterback. He ended up getting benched, and they brought in Quentin Dormandy. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get back over to the other page. And I realized I stopped sharing the screen here. Obviously, the Houston Roughnecks did end up winning this game 33-12. In terms of rushing attempts, they had 16 total for Orlando. Jermaine Martin led the way with 9. He looked pretty good. Kelvin Taylor behind him didn't look too bad either for a guy they just brought back. And then Dedrick Thomas, the wide receiver, did get 1 carry. Paxton Lynch had 1 carry for 0 yards as well. For our receivers here, they involved a lot of different guys. So the guys that at least started for them, Charleston Rambo, and then Cody Lattimore, who actually lined up as a wide receiver. This tight end depth chart thing was pretty much a lie. So he was kind of more their X receiver. Charleston Rambo was their Z. Eli Rogers most of the time was their slot. They mixed in Andrew Jamel a little bit in the slot on the outside. Stephen Goodry was available a little bit on the outside as well. Dedrick Thomas was in a couple times. They used both tight ends, Ryan Becker and Logan Carter. And then Dontrez Bird got in there a little bit as well. So going back over to the Houston side of this, I got ahead of myself here for a little bit. So in terms of the Roughnecks, we mainly saw Brandon Silvers at quarterback. He had all the pass attempts, at least in this game, of 42. They had 20 total rush attempts. A couple of them came from the quarterback position. So the Brandon Silver ones weren't design rushes, but the Cole McDonald ones more likely than not were, since I didn't see the complete end of this game. But, he had a couple packages where he was in there running the ball. He scored a touchdown as well on the ground. So it seems like they'll use him a little bit towards the goal line in some sub packages as a rushing quarterback. Max Borghi mainly led the way in terms of rush attempts and kind of snaps for the running backs. We also saw Dewan Lee in there as well. And then we saw a lot of wide receivers overall. Travell Harris, Javante Kirkland, Dante Burnett, Ben Putnam, Nick Holly, Cedric Bird were kind of all in the mix at wide receiver. And then we had Garrett Owens as kind of that versatile tight end piece overall. So getting back over to my spreadsheet real quick, talking about some target shares and some carry rates as well. So let me bring that back up. I apologize that this is a little bit clunky, kind of going back and forth. Probably should go through some of the games or just kind of the spreadsheet in general, but just let me know the ways that you would like to see this improved in the future too, because a lot of it's a little bit clunky, especially week 1. And we don't really have snap counts. If any do come out, I'll have this in the spreadsheet. This will be up on my Patreon page at patreon.com/CoachCraigSport as well. So going back, we're just going to start with Houston because it was the easiest team for me to get to. 100% of the pass attempts went to Brandon Silvers. 42. He had completed 26 of them. 272 yards, pretty good there. 2 passing touchdowns, obviously was good. He did have the 2 interceptions, which kind of limited him a little bit. 16.88 points. Going to be a very popular pick in week 2. In terms of the carries, they had 20 overall, so the math was pretty easy. Cole McDonald had 4, so he had 20% market share on terms of carries. Brandon Silvers had 2, but those were really just scrambles, so not really too worried about those ones at this point in time. Max Borghi had 8 carries, so he had a 40% share, and then we had Dewan Lee with 30% share on his 6 carries. Both running backs look pretty efficient there overall. In terms of wide receiver target share, or target share out of backfield as well. So Max Borghi had a 9.5%. He had 4 targets, 4 receptions, 32 yards. Excuse me. Then Nick Holly, kind of that running back wide receiver, mainly play wide receiver in this game. He only had 2 targets, although it seemed like he was on the field a ton. Was really disappointed because he was a super cheap guy that I liked. He had a lot of familiarity in this offense, so I kind of expected a little bit more out of him overall. So that's kind of something to note there. Just under 5% target share. Dewan Lee had the 1 low target out of the backfield, so just over 2% for him. Mainly, we saw a lot of Dante Burnett at 12 he had 12 targets overall, 8 receptions, 90 yards in the touchdown. So he was just over 28.5% target share. Cedric Byrd coming in just less than 5%. He had the 2 targets. He caught both of them for 20 yards. Davion Davis, not sure exactly how much he played in the game, but he had a 0% target share. Same thing with Aaron Nelson. I'm just adding in a couple zeros for him just since he did play as well. Travell Harris at 26%, just over it, 11 targets, 5 receptions, 48 yards there. So kind of him and Burnett were the main factors for this game. Javante Kirkland also played really well, 8 targets, 5 receptions, 71 yards, and the 1 lone touchdown, 19% target share for him. Putnam had 1 target, so he was around 2%. Garrett Owens had 1 target that should have been a touchdown, so he was right around 2% as well. So kind of what can we take away from this at this point in time? Looks like Burnett, Harris, and Kirkland probably going to be the big 3 wide receivers. They'll use Max Borghi out of the backfield. And then kind of everybody else in there will just kind of mix and match from there as well. We're going to go back up to the Guardians and talk about them real quickly. So obviously we saw Paxton Lynch get this start. He ultimately ended up getting benched. DeAndre Francois was inactive this week, so he was not available to come in after that. So Paxton Lynch had, we'll call 54% of the pass attempts this week. It was 46% for Quentin Dormandy. Paxton Lynch technically was more efficient as he was 15 out of 21, as Dormandy was 12 out of 18. 136 yards for Paxton Lynch, 142 yards for Quentin Dormandy. Dormandy did have the 1 touchdown, but 2 interceptions. Paxton Lynch had 1 touchdown and 1 pick. I did not do the math for Dormandy's stats. Not really too worried about that at this point in time. Paxton Lynch had the 1 lone rush, which was on a scramble, which gets him to 6.25%, but I'm more interested in the running back carries. So we saw 9 for Jermaine Martin, who he was the starting running back. He had 41 yards, 56% target or carry share for him, 31% carry share for Calvin Taylor behind him. Both running backs looked really good. I expect them to run the ball at least more early on. Unfortunately, they're kind of got behind early. They had to throw a ball a little bit more. And that really hurt their team overall. So that's just something to keep in mind there. So I think this offensive line is going to be a lot better at run blocking. It seemed like they really struggled in pass blocking once they kind of got to the point where they knew they had to keep throwing the ball. In terms of target share, we have Jermaine Martin, who had just had the 1 target, so he was at 2.5%. Dontrez Byrd had 2 targets, 2 catches for 11 yards, so right around 5%. Stephen Goodry had 4 targets, 2 receptions, 2 yards on them. That's a name to keep your eye out for maybe this week, especially if Cody Lattimore is too injured to play. He's a guy that I do like a lot. He is big, 6'3", 6'4" wide receiver with a little bit of speed as well. Ran a sub 4.5, back a couple years ago at the combine. So I do think he's somebody to keep your eye out on, kind of as a achiever piece and everything else like that. Andrew Jamel also had 4 targets, caught 3 of them, 80 yards, 1 long touchdown in there when Quentin Dormandy was in. So if Dormandy starts this week, maybe that's a guy you're a little bit more interested in. Jamel, I thought, would be mainly a slot wide receiver, but they did play him a little bit on the outside as well. He looked pretty good for a guy coming over from the fan-controlled football league. And then we had kind of our last guy, or there was a lot of guys here actually, but Cody Lattimore had 6 targets and Charleston Rambo both had 6 targets, 15% target share for both of them. Rambo caught 4 passes for 22 yards. Cody Lattimore caught 5 passes for 68 yards. And that one kind of inglorious touchdown where it could have been an interception, could have been a touchdown, but called a touchdown on the field. So they kind of kept it that way overall. The leading target getter this week was Eli Rogers out of the slot, 7 catches. He had 7 targets, 4 receptions for 40 yards there. 18% target share for him. Dedrick Thomas also had 4 targets. So it's pretty spread out at this point in time. He caught 2 of them for 42 yards. He obviously had that carry as well. Ryan Becker had 2 targets, caught both of them for 9 yards. And then Logan, excuse me. And then Logan Carter had 3 targets for 2 catches and 3 yards. So tight end's not super involved. Obviously, both of them did have a catch. There's not anything that's really standing out of this packet so far. If Cody Lattimore plays, probably want to get some exposure to him, especially if Paxton Lynch is the starter with the good chemistry that they have. Obviously, you can take some shots on like an Eli Rogers, Charleston Rambo, Andrew Jamel, or Stephen Goodry if that's something you want to do as well. But it's pretty flat at this point in time. Obviously, without the snap share, it's a little bit harder to tell. I know seeing some snaps shares that did come out, like on Twitter, that some of the people that have privy access to some of the stats that necessarily I don't have myself. Charleston Rambo supposedly played every snap, so that he could be a big beneficiary if Lattimore doesn't come out. But Rambo's not been a guy that I've been too high on personally myself. I saw a good Reed, probably the guy I'm attacking to this week if we get no Cody Lattimore overall. Let's see. So that's kind of that game. Moving on, I think we're going to go to the Battlehawks. I'm just going to keep it on this spreadsheet for now. If anybody wants to go back to the actual XFL site, we can do that as well. But for the Battlehawks, obviously AJ McCarron was the starter. Nick Tiano was the backup. Manny Wilkins was inactive. And we saw AJ McCarron throw 100% of the passes in this game. So he was the starter. He played the whole game. Not too worried about that. 19.8 points. Unfortunately, still a little bit salty on Prize Picks. I took the under at 1.5 touchdowns for AJ McCarron. He had 0 touchdowns until a minute 25 left in the game when he threw his first touchdown. They obviously converted the onside kick where they did the 4th and 15 play, and then he threw another touchdown to give them the lead and ultimately win the game. So unfortunately, the prop bet didn't pay off. If you played AJ McCarron last week, you kind of got bailed out, but he threw the ball 26 times, 18 completions, 190 yards, the 2 touchdowns. He even ran the ball 4 times for 12 yards, which most of it came, I believe, on 1 carry, which still came about, over 26% of the carries, which they really didn't run the ball as much as I would expect. I think they're going to run the ball a little bit more in the coming weeks, but Brian Hill did get banged up in this game as well, ultimately came back to the game. Hill got about 40% of the carries. We saw 20% go to Mateo Durant and 13% go to Kareem Walker. Kareem Walker had 2 for 1 yard. Mateo Durant had 3 for 0 yards. So it seems like at this point in time, Brian Hill is the lead running back. Mateo Durant and Kareem Walker will mix in just a little bit as well. In terms of the market share for targets, Mateo Durant had 3 targets, 3 catches for 6 yards. So he was at 11.5%. Brian Hill at the same 3 catches, 3 targets, 3 receptions, 26 yards, and then just under 4% for Kareem Walker on his 1 lone target that he caught for 4 yards. But when you're looking at this too, it's important to note that's 20% or 26, 27% of the market share that went to the running backs. So AJ McCarron is kind of dumping off to the running back position. It's going to limit the upside down the field, which is not something I'm surprised with. AJ McCarron doesn't have the strongest arm in the world by any means, but could be good for guys like Mateo Durant, Brian Hill. Brian Hill probably going to be a guy that I play a decent amount of this week once again. In terms of the wide receiver target share, we saw Marcel Aitman get 4 targets and Austin Proel get 4 targets. So both came in about 15% target share overall. Marcel Aitman really didn't do much. He had the 1 long target down the sideline. Probably should have been an offensive pass interference call. It looked like he pushed off there too. So I'm a little bit worried about him at this point in time. Not a guy that I'm going to be playing a lot of personally. But we saw Hakeem Butler come off, kind of is their 3rd, 4th wide receiver, 11.5% target share. He had the 3 targets, 3 receptions, 32 yards, had the nice touchdown, which was a pretty good pass by AJ McCarron as well. Gary Jennings had, the 1 lone target off the bench, so just coming in under 4% target share. Darius Byrd had 3 targets, just the 1 reception for 7 yards, so comes in about 11.5. The tight ends weren't too involved here. They combined for 4 targets. Jake Sutherland was the only one that caught one, 21-yard reception by him. It was actually a pretty nice catch. So probably avoiding their tight ends once again this week, especially since AJ McCarron's been dumping off more to the running back position, at least from our 1-game sample size. So I'm going to move to the other side of that game. So we're going to go down to the Brahmas. And for this game, we saw Jack Cohen as the starter. Jawan Pass was inactive, and Reed Sinnett was the backup for this game. Jack Cohen did he had every pass attempt in this game. Not sure why that was so hard to say. He only ended up with 11.28 fantasy points. Personally, from what I saw in this game, I didn't watch the whole game, but I watched a lot of the clips from this game. Jack Cohen didn't look that great. He was throwing the ball with a little bit more velocity than I remember at Notre Dame or Wisconsin, though. Had the 1 passing touchdown. He had the 1 interception. He threw the ball 36 times. They ran the ball 39 times. So a pretty balanced offense overall, even though they were ahead in this game, ultimately ended up losing. 25 completions, 207 passing yards. So not terrible numbers. He ultimately ended up running the ball 4 times for 10 yards. He had like an 8-yard scramble that really boosted that. So not really too worried about him since he's not an athletic quarterback. In terms of what we're really looking at here from a carry perspective, Kalen Balaj had 24 carries. Jaquez Patrick had 10. Those are the two that we're really looking at. John Hillman didn't even factor in the run game at all. So Kalen Balaj was kind of lead back at least week one, 61.5%. And then we had Jaquez Patrick, 25.6%. Landon Akers did get in there with one carry as well as the slot wide receiver. So going forward, we're going to assume that Kalen Balaj is kind of the lead running back, but I would not be surprised if this ends up being more of a 50-50 backfield in the near future, since Jaquez Patrick pretty familiar in this offense. These running backs are pretty similar in types of build. They're both bigger running backs. Maybe Balaj is just a hair quicker than Jaquez Patrick, but that's about it at this point in time. So both have a NFL experience and everything else like that. So a lot of weeks, maybe you're just playing the one that's just a little bit cheaper overall. However, in terms of the target share, we saw 12% as there was. So I did get my line off here a little bit too. So we saw 4 targets for Kalen Balaj, and his receiving yards was 13. I believe he had 3 catches. So I got my line off just a little bit there. He had 12% target share. So he was kind of the receiving back out of this backfield this past week. Jaquez Patrick, just the one target for 1 catch for 9 yards. He was at 3%. Hillman was kind of the other guy in this backfield. I thought maybe they use him as a receiving back, but doesn't seem like they used him at all. I don't know if he played at all in this game, but he was not inactive. That's for sure. Then we move down to the wide receiver position. Landon Akers out of the slot, 21% target share, 7 targets, 7 receptions, 35 yards. He's a very safe guy. You know, when you're thinking about some of these guys, when you put it like an NFL level, like a Jacoby Myers, he's going to go out there and he's just going to catch some passes, probably not going to score a touchdown, probably not going to do anything too crazy. But if you're looking for that this week in DFS, you can definitely do that. Decent target share for him. Fred Brown at 12%. He had the 4 targets, 4 receptions, 36 yards. Was a little bit more involved than I thought. Then we got Travis Johnson here. He only had 9% target share. He had 3 targets. He had 2 receptions, 1 reception for 17 yards. The other 2 passes that were thrown his way were drops. So that is something to note there. Maybe he kind of goes on thin ice and loses some playing time there. Jalen Tolliver, 15% target share. He's kind of the guy that I thought would lead this room. He had 5 targets, 3 catches for 49 yards. Not a bad day by any means. I think it's going to be a lot brighter for him in the future. So wouldn't be too concerned about him. Still would be willing to play him, especially in GPPs once again this week. Probably not a cash game play like he was in my mind last week, though. Darius Roberson Jr., technically he was listed on the inactive list, but on XFL.com, they said he returned a punt. So we'll see how that all shakes out. So he at least returned a punt, supposedly. TJ Vasher, 6% target. He had 2 targets, 1 catch on the screen for 10 yards, but wasn't really too involved otherwise. So I'm not really concerned about him once again. I like both these tight ends that they do have there. They are athletic, but since there's 2 of them, you're probably not going to want to go there. But they did have 7 targets to the tight end position, 15% target share for Mack, 6% for Yelder. Yelder looked the better of the 2. He had 2 catches for 29 yards. Mack had the 5 targets, 3 catches for 9 yards. So maybe in the future we can play one of those 2 guys, but probably not this week overall. And that's kind of it for the Brahmas and the Battlehawks. We're going to go to the Sea Dragons and the Defenders. So I think we're going to start on the Sea Dragons side, where surprise, surprise, they threw the ball 54 times. June Jones is the offensive coordinator. This is not much surprise at all. Ben DiNucci was the starting quarterback for them. He threw 96% of the pass attempts. The Steven Montez, the backup, got 4% in there, which was a weird timing. I didn't really watch this game particularly myself because traveling at that point in time. But 15.58 points for Ben DiNucci and the 1 touchdown to Josh Gordon. He had 2 interceptions. Both weren't the greatest plays. One was a tip ball, though, so I can't really blame him that. The other one was kind of a good play by the defender, but, DiNucci probably could have looked him off a little bit better at that as well. But 54 pass attempts for them. They had, let's see, I just want to get the rushing attempt number as well. So they had 17 rushing attempts, so 71 plays they ran overall. Ben DiNucci, I think only one of his rushing attempts was an actual rushing attempt too. So we'll call it 16 rushing attempts out of 71 plays. So they are going to be that pass heavy offense that we do expect from June Jones as their offensive coordinator once again. So not too much else to say from that perspective. In terms of the running back carries, we did see Morgan Ellison get 3 carries. Brendan Knox got 11. Ellison got 17 yards. Knox got 31 yards. Knox did get the touchdown. So Knox got about, we're just shy of 65% of the market share. And then, just shy of, 18% for Morgan Ellison, but there wasn't a lot of share to go around there. Both running backs did look pretty decent when they did have the opportunity, though. So we'll see maybe if they try to involve them just a little bit more in the future. From the target share perspective, this is going to be the interesting one for this team overall. But Morgan Ellison had 2 targets out of the backfield. He had 1 reception for 4 yards. So seems like he's more of the receiving back, which isn't a surprise since Knox wasn't really much of a receiver in college. He had 0 targets in this game. Ellison had, just under 4% target share. TJ Ham was just under 2%. He only had the 1 lone target. Not sure if that was out of the backfield or at wide receiver, but he was listed on the depth chart as wide receiver. Seems like he's pretty buried at this point in time. So I'm not really too interested in him. We're going to start off with the top target getters this week, though. So Jacob Pearson out of the slot, 26.4%, 14 targets, 12 receptions, 95 yards. Really good week for him overall. Expect for him to be very, very popular this week. Don't really have too much else to say about him. I thought people were hyping him up just a little bit too more. I thought it'd be a little bit more Juwan Green, but both guys are pretty speedy. It seems like Green just didn't be the guy that factored in as much this week. So we're just going to have to go with what we saw for the most part at this point in time. Maybe Green, surfaces himself back up once again this week. Then in terms of the second target getter was Blake Jackson, I believe. Play a little bit of the slot, play a little bit of the outside. 11 targets, 8 receptions, 51 yards. So another one of those solid floor guys. If he gets a touchdown, he's going to look pretty good overall. The big question is just going to be, are they going to throw the ball 50 plus times every single game? Wouldn't put it past June Jones, though. And then we have Josh Gordon coming in right around 17%, 9 targets, 6 receptions, 74 yards, the 1 touchdown. He's going to be a pretty safe play most weeks, but obviously he is the most expensive wide receiver now at this point in time. Once again, Juwan Green only had 2 receptions, 1 catch for 4 yards, so 4% target share for him. Kelvin McKnight, who I really didn't expect to do much of anything, played a little bit of slot, but 6 targets, 4 receptions, 19 yards, 11% target share. Wouldn't expect too much from him overall. Next week, they should get Jalen Reed back as well, so we'll see if he factors in or not. Jordan Vesey, who was dealing with an illness part of the week, had 4 targets, 2 receptions, 22 yards. Did kind of start the game, bigger body wide receiver, so he could be an interesting play down the road in the future. Same thing with Damon Willis. Just under 6% target share, but he had 3 targets, 1 catch, 3 yards, nothing special there. And then Charlie Tempoe, the tight end, 2% target share. He had 1 catch. Don't expect him to be too involved most weeks either way, though. So that's kind of where we're at there. We'll go over to the defenders, and then we'll kind of do more of a first look for DFS for this week. I'm still working on the structure of this video to see how I want to do the recap. If you guys have any specific ideas, be sure to let me know. If you guys have any specific questions just based on like last week or looking forward for this week, definitely be sure to let me know as well. When we go over to the defenders, we saw an interesting game from them overall. The very run heavy team, which we kind of expected. Jordan Ta'amu threw 19 passes. Derek King threw 2. Derek King had 1 completion. Jordan Ta'amu had 8. So as a team, they completed less than 50% of their passes. They had 93 total yards passing. Jordan Ta'amu threw an interception. They had no passing touchdowns. Not really appealing at this point in time from an offense, especially like Seattle's defense is okay, but it's not one of the greatest in the world. So I kind of want to see a little bit more from DC. Hopefully they get some continuity rolling as the weeks coming along. I would not be surprised, however, if like Jordan Ta'amu starts losing a little bit more playing time to Derek King. It's just kind of Ta'amu's fallen off a cliff a little bit since Tampa days in the USFL kind of messed him up a little bit. Hopefully he kind of gets that back, but Jordan Ta'amu ran 5 times, 9 yards, 1 rushing touchdown. Derek King, 8 carries for 14 yards and a touchdown. So 15% market share for Ta'amu, 24% for Derek King overall. Not really sure how many of Ta'amu's were scrambles, but most of King's plays were scripted, and they used him a lot in like 2-point conversions, 3-point conversions when they were running down there too as well. So he could have some viability in the future for sure, especially as a lower owned guy. And then if like Ta'amu would get benched or injured any week, he could really pop up as well. From a running back perspective, if you want to throw Puka Williams in there, he was inactive this first week. He's kind of their running back wide receiver hybrid. Abram Smith led the backfield with 33% of the carries, 1/3 of the carries. He had 11 carries for 28 yards, wasn't super effective at that. Raquel Armstead, 8 carries for 30 yards, 24% of him. Artavius Pierce did not factor in whatsoever. So mainly Abram Smith, Raquel Armstead at this point in time. Armstead might be the guy I'm a little bit more interested in since he was involved in the receiving game. Obviously, Abram Smith, not known as much as a pass catcher at this point in time. He did not factor in at all, had 0 targets. Same thing with Artavius Pierce. Raquel Armstead had 2 targets, so 9.5% target share. He had 1 reception for 14 yards. He looked pretty good out there, looking a little bit more like his old self. Wish he would hold on to the ball a little bit better from the plays that I saw. He was kind of holding it like my old football coach in high school used to say, like a loaf of bread, kind of hanging it out there. A little bit of ball security, you like to see a little bit better there overall. In terms of wide receivers, Chris Blair had 1 target. He had 1 reception for 10 yards. Jaquez Azard, kind of this big wide receiver name for them, was expected to be the main guy for them, 2nd-round pick. Only had 1 target, didn't catch it. He had 1 carry for 3 yards, so he's pretty useless like week 1. Don't expect it to be the case like going forward. So maybe he's a sneaky guy for GPPs this week or like in the coming weeks as well. Josh Hammond had 19% target share. He had 4 targets, only caught 1 of them for 14 yards. Lucky Jackson was their main guy in terms of targets. He had 5 targets, 4 catches, 4 receptions for 25 yards. Also had like a point conversion after as well. So 24% target share for him. We'll see if that continues going forward as we move. Sorry for excuse me. Sorry. A little bit struggle talking today. Been sick a little bit over the weekend too, so my throat's a little bit sore. My nose is a little bit funky, so do apologize for that. We got Josh Malone coming in with 19%. Ethan Wolf had 19% as well. Both had 4 targets, only caught 1. Wolf had a 12-yard screen pass, and Josh Malone had 18 yards. Malone was actually out there on the field a lot from what I saw, so I wouldn't be surprised if he kind of becomes like maybe their ex wide receiver, since he's a little bit bigger body. He's got some NFL experience. Maybe a guy to buy low on. The 2 other tight ends, Trey Berry and Bradley Moore, did not factor in the passing games whatsoever. So that's kind of what we have in terms of target share, in terms of market share for carries for week 1, doing a little bit of recap in that regard. If there's anything like you guys like from that, be sure to let me know. If there's anything you like to see a little bit differently, let me know, because obviously it's the first week that we're kind of recapping this. It's harder to get your hand on some of these stats. If I do have the snap share numbers in the future, I'll add them into this sheet. But otherwise, this sheet will be up on my Patreon at patreon.com/CoachCraigSports. It's a small monthly donation, about the price of a cheap cup of coffee at that. So gonna get off of here, gonna move over to DraftKings real quick, and we'll do a kind of a first look overall. So for our first look overall, we're going to start just with the Thursday night game. I'm going to go position by position. So AJ McCarron's $10,700. Personally, I am not a big AJ McCarron fan. He doesn't offer a very good upside. He bailed himself out week 1 just by the 2 touchdown passes. So $10,700, really not paying up for him. If you want to play him on GPPs, you can do it. Ben DiNucci, $10,200. If he's going to throw the ball 50 times a week, he's definitely going to be in play, unless he plays so bad that he ultimately ends up losing his job, which he could do since he had 3 turnovers in week 1. So the 2 interceptions, 1 wasn't his fault, and then he had the fumble at the goal line to lose the game. So if you want to play Ben DiNucci in GPP, if you want to play him in cash, you can definitely do that. Moving over to the running back position at this point in time, Brian Hill, I'm very comfortable playing him at $7,300 as a lead back for St. Louis. If you want to take a crack at Mateo Durant, kind of hope he does a little bit more this week at $5,500, you could definitely do that. You could run out Brendan Knox. He's kind of the lead guy in the backfield, but $6,400 feels a little bit expensive for him. Morgan Nelson at 44. If you really want to take kind of pay down dart throw there, you could do it as well, but nothing too crazy at this point in time. So mainly Brian Hill from this game at running back. Josh Gordon, he's $10,100. If you want to go out and play him, you can definitely do it. Expect him to be pretty popular since he's that big name once again. Marcel Aitman, $9,500. Particularly, I'm not touching because he had the 4 targets. I know still leading target share getter, but with AJ McCarron, I think his upside's very capped at this point in time. since he really needs the downfield play, and it's just not going to be there, I don't think, for him more times than not in this offense. Ja'Cory Pearson obviously had big week one, going to be popular this week. I don't really mind this price tag at $7,300. You can definitely play him in cash or GPP if you want to do so. Obviously, if you're playing Ben DiNucci in cash, you're probably going to want to play either, Josh Gordon, Ja'Cory Pearson as one of the wide receivers as well. Darius Shepherd at $6,900 makes no sense to me. So that will be a guy that if we miss on him this week, I'm fine missing with him on this week as well. It's important to note with this Thursday game too, there's so much news that could come out between Thursday and Saturday when the next game is, that it kind of makes it interesting to get exposure to this game. And we don't want to be too overexposed to it at the same time. But I will be doing, another live stream, either tomorrow or Thursday, talking through things a little bit more from the DFS perspective, just kind of talking about where I kind of feel like going in terms of picks this week. Blake Jackson, $6,400, a little bit of hefty price tag for him, but if you want to go there, definitely understand it. Campbell, we're not touching. Hakeem Butler, if you want to take that gamble and hope he scores a touchdown again at $5,400, you can do that. Battlehawks tight ends not in play this week. Have no interest there whatsoever. Jawan Green, $4,800. If you want to hope on the bounce back week, you could definitely play a little bit of him in GPPs as a pay down option, but not super interested there this week. If we get snap share rates that tell me otherwise, then I will post something, whether it's on here or on Twitter. Austin Proel at $4,400. Definitely don't mind going there once again this week. He's still a cheap price tag. Obviously had a great week one and, led their team in targets essentially too. Stephen Mitchell missed week one. Still not interested in him. Kelvin McKnight, Damian Willis, VC. These guys down here at $3,000. If you want to take a shot as a pay down option in GPPs, you can definitely do it. But not anybody we're going out of our way for. In terms of defense, Battlehawks, they got that decent defense. DiNucci had 3 turnovers, so you can do it. Probably not a lot of people are going to play them this week. $4,800, a little bit more than I like to pay. Seattle, they don't have the worst defense in the world. I believe the Battlehawks have a couple injured offensive linemen too as well. I believe Darren pointed that out to me in our chat that we kind of had going back and forth. So take a look out for them. They could be pretty popular this week as a decent pay down option as well. Then we're going to go over to the Vipers and the Defenders game. So we're going to go to quarterback real quick. Jordan Ta'amu, if you want to play him at $9,700, you could, but I'm not particularly there this week. It's more of a GPP play. Same thing with Luis Perez. If we get news that Brett Hundley's starting at $7,000, he's going to be very interesting. Obviously, if we got news that De'Aaron King was starting at $6,700, he'd be very interesting as well. Both could potentially be cash game plays at that point in time. Abram Smith somehow went up to $8,400, although he played terrible. So probably not there this week. He needs to fall in the end zone to really pay off at his price tag. Rod Smith was absolutely terrible, not playing him at $6,800. John Lovett was not very good either at $5,600. Not interested there. Raquel Armstead, $4,600 GPP if you want to take a shot there. And then DeAndre Torrey at $3,000 flat minimum running back. Maybe he gets a little bit more involved for Vegas this week. Pass catching running back could be involved out of the backfield. But if they're going to use Sweeting back there some too, kind of limits Torrey's upside a little bit. But if you really want a pay down option, you could go there as well. But that's kind of where we're at in terms of running backs. Wide receivers, Geronimo Allison is $9,100. I really don't get that one. I'm not going to play that one myself. Maybe, just maybe, they're expecting Brett Hundley to start and him and Allison to have some chemistry back from their Packers days, but I'm not buying it. Jeff Badette, $8,900, obviously showed out pretty well week one. Probably going to be pretty popular this week just because he had that big week one. But if you want to go to him or Martavis Bryant, I understand it. Bryant looked pretty slow week one, so I'm not like super interested in him. But the Brees Deuce price tag does make him a little bit more interesting than previously. Josh Hammond at $7,400. I really just don't see the upside with the quarterback play at this point in time. Zard, $6,300. He's $1,000 cheaper than last week. If you want to take a shot there, you can. But we're also expecting some better quarterback play for doing that. Lucky Jackson, $4,600. Mid-range price that if you really want to get there in GPPs, you could. Sexton, Sweeting, you can take some shots on as cheaper plays as well. Moving down here, like if Puka Williams plays or Chad Hansen plays and they get involved at 3K, they could be a pay down option. Josh Malone, probably preferred pay down option at the flat minimum of $3,000 since he did play a lot week one. He had the 4 targets, although the quarterback play kind of sucked and he only had 1 reception out of it. So that is something to note as well, but kind of be looking at him for the most part. The defenses, Vipers and defenders, if I'd be more inclined to play the Vipers this week. They are $3,300. They had a decent defense. They really didn't lose the game because of their defense. They lost their game because of their offense giving up pick sixes, really. So don't mind going against them, especially against DC, whose quarterback situation may not be quite what we thought it was going to be to start the season. Then we're going to move over to Orlando and San Antonio. For Orlando, this quarterback situation is a complete mess. I guess you can call it. So if you want to play Paxton Lynch in like a GPP, you could. If you want to play Quentin Dormady in a GPP, you could. But I wouldn't put too much money behind it. Jack Cohn, like a lot of people are kind of knocking Orlando's defense, but I don't think that's fair because Houston offense is going to give a lot of these defenses a lot of problems. This higher pace, 4 wide receivers sets. Most of these defenses, especially early on, are not equipped to play with this. They're not equipped to have 6 defensive backs on the field, or even 5 at that sometimes too. And then you take in the fact that CJ Holmes, probably their best corner, was on the reserve list because he's hurt at this point in time. They lost Javarius Davis, who's probably their second best corner in that game too. And then you're playing against 4 wide receiver sets with, your 3rd and 4th best corner. And then you got your 5th and 6th best corner out there, or defensive back, safety moving down and kind of playing that spot. It's not going to end up too well most times, but I think against San Antonio, it should be a little bit better matchup for them overall. San Antonio's offensive line did not protect the best week 1. Jack Cohn, I think, is going to be prone to making some mistakes as well. For the running back position, Jermaine Martin, if you want to get there at $8,100, I understand that. I think Orlando should run the ball a little bit more, and this should be a little bit more competitive game as well. So I would not be surprised if he has a bigger week this week, but you're definitely paying up for it. Kalen Balazs is $7,100. Probably going to be one of the most popular plays since he had the most carries week 1. Jaquez Patrick, if you want to get off of some of the Kalen Balazs chalk, that's where you're going to go. And then Kelvin Taylor down here at flat 3K. If you really want to go down for a pay down option, if you want to really get there, you could do it as well, since he was mixing in pretty decently with Martin. But Martin is definitely the more talented back there. Obviously, he's the younger back too as well, since Calvin Taylor is a little bit up there in age at this point in time. Then we move over to the wide receivers. Charles Rambo, $8,700. I'm just not touching. Like, even if Lattimore's out, I'm not touching $8,700. Rather pay for other guys in that price range. Jalen Tolliver, if you want to take your shot there at 72, you could. Landon Akers, safe floor at 7,000, doesn't give you too much upside overall, especially with Jack Cohn at quarterback. Stephen Goodry is still a little bit expensive at $6,200, but if Lattimore does not play this week, I do see some upside there with him overall. Andrew Jamel obviously had that long touchdown, so probably going to be a little bit more popular this week. If Dormady starts, if Francois starts, I'd be a little bit more interested in Jamel, since he kind of had that success with Dormady after Dormady came in, and that fan control football league, a little bit of experience there or familiarity with DeAndre Francois overall. When we move down, Tony Johnson, he's a complete dart throw, but he really dropped a lot of the balls he was throwing last week. Vasher not interested in. Cody Lattimore, if he plays, $3,700, going to be super chalky. Dontrez Burr, we're not interested in. Dedrick Thomas, not really interested in. Fred Brown, just a GPP pay down option if you really want to go there. Eli Rogers at $3,100, especially if Lattimore doesn't play. That'd be the guy I'm interested in. Cash GPP pay down option overall this week. So that'd be a pretty interesting one. If you want to pay all the way down to $2,500 for Deion Yelder in GPPs, I don't completely hate it, but the fact they have him and Mac once again just kind of limits both their upsides. In terms of defense, I think you can actually play both these defenses this week. Brahmas weren't too bad besides like the last 2 minutes, week 1. Guardians defense, I don't think they're that terrible. And, going against Jack Cohn and that offense line gives them a lot of possibilities. So if you want to play them, I could even play the Guardians in cash this week. I know a lot of people probably aren't going to do that, but either one of these defenses, I feel pretty comfortable with this week overall. Then we're going to get over to the last game with Arlington Renegades and the Houston Roughnecks once again. So looking at the quarterback position, we got Brandon Silvers, $8,600. He's probably going to be the chalk of the week. This is a pass-heavy offense. He's still got 272 yards last week, 2 touchdowns. Pretty safe play. He would be my favorite cash game quarterback this week. He's going to have plenty of opportunities. Arlington defense, everybody's freaking out because they scored a lot of points last week, but his 2 pick sixes on 2 plays that should never have been thrown. Luis Perez should have thrown the screen at the feet of the running back or the defensive lineman there. And he should have never thrown the pick six went to Devontae Bosby as well. Rod Woodson even came out and said this as well. So it's not just me saying it. So it's his head coach saying it too. So that's why people think Brett Hundley could end up starting this week as well, even though Perez wasn't terrible. He had the really good first half, had some struggles in the second half, 2 really bad throws though. Drew Plitt is the starter probably for now. $8,000. If you want to play with GPPs, you can go there. If you really want to take a shot on Kyle Slaughter and hope Plitt kind of poops the bed, once again, then you could go there, but I'm not going there myself this week personally. Brandon Silvers be the main guy out of this game. From running back perspective, Max Borghi is all the way up to $8,000 at this point in time. He's good pass catching running back. They did use DeJuan Lee a little bit more out of that backfield than I would have liked. I would have expected more Max Borghi, but I think he's very intriguing at this point in time. Obviously, good pass catching back in a offense that's going to run a lot of plays. I'm going to throw the ball a ton and kind of open up some running lanes for him overall. Obviously, it's a system that he's pretty familiar with too as well. So if you want to play Max Borghi again this week, no problems there. If you want to play him in cash, you can probably do it as well. Keith Ford not playing at $7,400. He did not look good last week. I know some other people probably try to say otherwise, but he had one good run. That was it. Davion Smith led the backfield, $5,700. Don't mind playing him in GPP. You could probably mix him into cash if you really wanted to, but don't think you have to do that this week. Adrian Killens would just be a pure dart throw at $4,800. So not interested in him. DeJuan Lee, kind of the same thing as Adrian Killens, pure dart throw. Nick Holley, I'd be very interested to see how many snaps he was on the field. It felt like he was on the field a ton, but he only had the 2 targets. One of these weeks, he's going to pop off, and if $3,000, if you hit the right week, you're going to be very happy with that. But if you're like last week, you're not going to be happy at all, which was me in a couple lineups because I did play a decent amount of Nick Holley last week since he was a guy that was super, super familiar with this offense. AJ Smith had worked with him in the past iteration of the XFL as well. So when we talk about the wide receiver position, so Dante Burnett for Houston obviously was their leading target getter, $8,500. You can definitely play him once again. Rennell Hall is $8,100 for a guy that mainly was a defensive back, magically showed up at wide receiver on the depth chart and missed week 1. So, yeah, we're not touching that one, even if he does end up playing this week. Jordan Smallwood somehow $7,500 for some reason, and he couldn't separate to save his life, although he played a lot of plays last week, so not interested in him. Javante Kirkland, if you want to go there this week, $7,100 definitely makes some sense. Played a lot of snaps, had a decent target share there. Sal Cannell at $6,500 at tight end, definitely in play. Leading target getter and probably going to be so once again for Arlington once again this week. Brandon Arcanado, not really interested at $6,100, doesn't really offer the upside. Travell Harris at $5,900, second leading target getter for Houston last week. Went down $700 in price tag. That is a spot that I'm very interested in this week. He got 9.8 points last week. I think he can get you double-digit points for under $6K. Winningham, not interested in. He's $4,300, barely played last week. Monster, same thing. Cedric Bird, if you really want to take a shot at $4,200 and a GPP, you could do it, but I'm not doing it. Garrett Owens only had that one target that he dropped for a touchdown, so not going to really interested in him. Smith didn't play week 1. Putnam, Nelson, Davis, really not interested in there. Byer, Ellis, Becker, the same way. But the one guy down here at the bottom, my boy Tyler Vaughns out of USC, he was the second leading target for this Arlington game. He was one of their few guys that could actually separate pretty well. And he played a lot on the outside and looked pretty good. So I would not mind going to him as a pay down option at $3,000. If you really wanted to play him in cash at $3,000, save money elsewhere, you could do that as well. So that's kind of where I'm at. In terms of first look for DFS at this point in time, once again, as I said, I'll be doing another stream tomorrow or Thursday, probably end up being tomorrow, just because I want to get out there, get as much content and as eyeballs on it as possible to help you guys out, since the first game does happen on Thursday. But can always leave some comments down below if anything changes, especially with my thoughts. But this is just kind of the initial look. So tomorrow will be a little bit more talking like where I play guys, maybe building a cash build, maybe building a GPP build together, answering some questions that you guys may have as well. But with that being said, that's pretty much what I have for this live stream. Recapping week 1 of XFL, doing a first look for XFL DFS, going over those target shares, going over the carry rates from week 1, kind of how we can utilize them, what we can kind of expect and take from that data overall. Once again, that spreadsheet will be up on my Patreon later today, so definitely be sure to check that out. If we do get any slot or if we get any snap rates from the previous week, I will add them to the spreadsheet as well. But that's pretty much what I have for today's video. Do appreciate everybody that did take the time out of their day to tune in for the live stream. If you have any suggestions, improvements for the recap as we move forward, definitely be sure to let me know so I can implement them and kind of make that process a little bit steadier for you guys. Just trying to figure out how to navigate that process since it's a little bit new experiment at this point in time. But once again, if you haven't already done so, you're watching this for the very first time for my channel or just in general and you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing. Definitely would appreciate it. Helps to build this channel that we're trying to build here at Coach Craig Sports, which is one that's truly for you, the viewers, helping you with your DFS, whether it's XFL DFS, NBA DFS will be coming back later this week as well. So if you check out those videos, definitely would appreciate it. A little bit of NBA prize picks, probably do some USF or probably doing some XFL prize picks this week as well that I'll post. I ran one line out there last week, but just with the numbers being what they were, we didn't know a lot, didn't really want to share it and cost you guys any money if it did go wrong for whatever reason. But this week should have probably a little bit of better feel on that as well. So I'll probably post those up on Twitter. So follow me on Twitter at CoachCraigSports. If you are a new or current subscriber, be sure to hit that notification bell down below so you never miss anytime that I do upload a video or go live for a live stream. But once again, probably tomorrow, probably end up being tomorrow afternoon for the XFL DFS live stream, kind of talking a little bit more, maybe in terms of like kind of core picks, building some lineups, talking some cash builds, talking some GPP lineups as well, answering any questions that you guys do have at that point in time. But with that being said, that's really all I have for today's video, for today's live stream. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed. Hopefully you gained something out of this. Hopefully I'm not just here rambling over to myself too much. Hopefully this process gets a little bit more streamlined as we move forward for the recaps and first look in the coming weeks as well. But with that being said, that's really all I have for today. Do appreciate everybody that did take the time out of their day to tune in. Definitely means a lot to me, and I hope that each and every one of you has a great rest of your day.